Okay, so screening at 2:15 p.m. at the Brattle in Cambridge on April 30th. And as I said, we have Makepeace here with us. Let's get right into it, shall we? What was your real impetus behind making this film?
Well, once I met Jessie Littledoe and heard her story and the story of how she and other Wampanoag people are bringing back the language, it was just astonishing to me. I mean, this is a language that disappeared 100 years ago. So I know I've worked in a lot of Native communities, mostly in the West, where the languages are endangered. There may be between 10 and 30 speakers, sometimes fewer, but there were speakers, and those tribes are many of them working on trying to revive their language and bring it back to the larger community. But in the case of the Wampanoag, there were no speakers when Jessie got the idea to try to bring it back. So it was just this enormous challenge and an unprecedented situation, and I just thought it was amazing, and started trying to raise funds for to make an independent documentary about this story of resurrection and cultural revival.
And did you find the community was receptive and supportive of this? I noticed there was a bit of a sort of a, I don't want to say a prejudice, but a cultural discomfort. You heard the term white people come up a lot in the film. And
I mean, understandably, every Native community has trust issues with the dominant culture. I mean, the history. You have to go very deep into the history to understand how Native people were displaced, and so it's always, working in Native communities where, as I said, I've worked in a number of them. The first thing is for people to trust you, and the way to do that is get to know people in the community as people. Don't bring a camera and stick it in people's faces. Get to know people, get to know what they think, and what they're doing, what their families are like. Let them know about your family. Connect. And the way that I got to know Jessie and Linda Coombs and Tobias Vanderhoop, many of the other people that are in my film, Wampanoag people who live in Mashpee or Quina or some of the other Wampanoag communities, was that I was working on part one of a series that WGBH produced called We Shall Remain. And so I met people and did interviews with them for that project, and then got the idea that that project is history. It's the We Shall Remain was a historical piece that ended in 1676, basically. But here is an amazing story, and I should say that part one, the one that I was working on back then, ended with total disaster for Native people, King Philip's War, which wiped out a lot of Native people in New England. But this is a story that I eventually made into We Still Live Here, of a positive story of Native people taking their destiny into their own hands and reconnecting with their culture and their heritage, and bringing back something that's really close to their hearts, which is their language. So I thought, wow, this is really a story that needs to be told. And did the usual thing with independent films, started writing grant proposals, asking friends to shoot for me for free.
We know
I
that
had some funding, and the usual struggle of making an independent film.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that carries you through on these films, these labors of love, these passions from the heart, is that you fall in love with a story or a subject, and that's what fuels the work that eventually can lead to really good films.
Something that struck me in the film that really resonated, once again, when as I said, not knowing how much I didn't know. When you use the street signs and whatnot, and the business names, do you feel that the language was less lost as it was co-opted by the culture that took over? I mean, it seems that the words were still around, just deprived to the people that originally used them.
Well, it's an interesting, I don't actually know how to understand the fact that New England is peppered with native names. Connecticut, Massachusetts, just in the area where I live, the town of Naugatuck, the Saugatuck River. You know, it's not just in Cape Cod and Massachusetts, but all over New England there are place names that are originally, are native names. I mean, the co-opting, to me, what I meant in that scene where Jesse's driving by all those signs, Sipawicit and Katamet and those places, what I meant by that was there's a presence here, a native presence here that people aren't necessarily aware of, but it's here. So, yeah, and then there's another scene where someone's talking about, a Wampanoag person is talking about how she left home in the 70s, and I guess she left earlier and came back in the 70s and was just amazed at all the development. And while she's talking about that, we are seeing, commercial signs at Pocasset Golf Club, for instance. That's co-opting, yes. But in terms of the actual place names that have been with us for hundreds of years, I think that's kind of a really cool thing. Mm-hmm. And it's unique to New England. You don't see that out west.
More of a vestige of respect for the native peoples than anything negative. I can see that.
That's how I like to see it. I don't know. I'd be curious to talk to more Wampanoag people about that. But that's how I see it.
Another interesting point that was brought to light for me, and I'm sure other people who view the work will find very amazing, the irony of the Bible to the Wampanoag people.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to say any more. I'm merely going to throw that to you. The irony of the Bible as relates to the Wampanoag people.
Well, it's a huge irony because, of course, the Puritans. I mean, what happened with the Wampanoag? The Pilgrims, 100 starving, dying Pilgrims, showed up on their shores in 1620, and there was a treaty made in 1621 where by that time there were only 50 of them left. The Wampanoags, and there were maybe 10,000 Wampanoags around. They were the strong ones at that point, and made a treaty with the Pilgrims, and then within 10 years, 20,000 Puritans arrived, completely overwhelming and outnumbering the Wampanoag. And those Puritans felt that they were doing God's work in converting the Wampanoags to Christianity. And for the Puritans, converting Native people to Christianity wasn't just about introducing, new theological ideas about God and Jesus and stuff. I mean, many of the Native people were kind of interested in the stories in the Bible, but for the Puritans, you couldn't say you were a Christian, or you couldn't be considered anything but pagan unless you totally changed your lifestyle. Cut your hair, you wore English clothes, you moved into towns where there were streets laid out in a grid, you went to church for hours and hours every Sunday, you confessed your sins and said that everything you used to believe in was evil, and that you're a heathen. And so the conversion of Native people really was pretty all-encompassing pressure to totally give up their traditional ways, their traditional beliefs, their traditional ways of life. And so the Bible, which was the Wampanoag Bible, was created by a missionary named John Eliot, who was at Harvard. First one was published, I believe, in 1663. He worked with Wampanoags, I believe mostly from Aquinnah and Martha's Vineyard, to translate the Bible. And the Bible was published at Harvard, and as I say, in 1663. First Bible ever published in the Western Hemisphere. And this Bible, of course, was published to help convert Wampanoag people to Christianity. And as I say, conversion meant giving up everything about your culture. So the great irony is that this Bible, this 1660s translation of the King James Bible has become the Rosetta Stone, the key to bringing back the language, because here you have a document that's a side-by-side document. You can put the King James Bible on the left and the Wampanoag Bible on the right. You can look at each sentence and each word and figure out how, what the translation is. And from that, Jessie is working also with people at MIT, where she got her master's degree, to decode the language. And the last I heard, they had about, I think, almost 12,000 entries.
Wow.
In their dictionary. They've been working on it since, I believe, Jessie started at MIT around 1995. So they've been working on it for 15 years. And but meanwhile, Jessie and others have become completely fluent in the language. So just to finish up about the irony is the Bible being created to obliterate the culture and eventually the language, becoming then the Rosetta Stone for bringing it back. It's really kind of an amazing story.
Salvation of a whole other kind, so to speak.
Yeah. And the things that Jessie and others are learning about their culture from the way that their ancestors translated concepts that they didn't have, like hell and sin and things like that. One story I really wanted to get into the film. I couldn't get it into the film in a seamless, organic way, but I like to tell it, is that she told me that the literal translation of the word that Wampanoag translators used in the Bible to translate hell is literally the house of people with empty heads, which I love.
That's brilliant.
And she says that the Wampanoags believed that the soul resided in the head. And so what could be more hellish than a house full of soulless people? And so, there are a lot of other things. There's also Napanasham, which is in the film. She mentions that the word Napanasham, it means to fall down.
Yes, to have your land taken.
Also used to mean to lose your land. And that just speaks volumes for the kinds of things they're discovering about how their ancestors felt about the world embedded in the language. So I was glad to go off on another tangent, but I've forgotten what it was.
Have you yourself picked up any Wampanoag? Do you speak any now as a result of this experience?
Well, I picked up a few words. Katapatash, thank you. And Mata, no. Makepeace, yes. But I really didn't focus on that. First of all, when you're making a film, you're focused on a lot of things. But also, the Wampanoag, Jessie and other members of the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Program, or project, I guess it is, feel very strongly that before anyone else learns the language, they want to have the Wampanoag, they want to be the ones speaking their language. It's a matter of pride for them, so they don't share it. They don't want non-Wampanoags learning their language. And I understand that. I mean, they feel that it's a little humiliating not to know your own language, and they want to know it before they hear other people speaking it. So I really, I would say a few things, but I didn't try to learn it.
Do you, at this point, just one, again, a very interesting point in the film, do you believe in prophecy now, if you didn't before? In terms of seven generations prophecy, I was amazed.
No, I think the story is amazing